Chapter 14. The Mystery of the Missing Will. We went straight back to the nursing home. Nick looked rather surprised to see us. "Yes, mademoiselle," said Poirot, answering her look. "I am like the Jack in the case. I pop up again. To begin with, I will tell you that I have put the order in your affairs. Everything is now neatly arranged." "Well, I expect it was about time," said Nick, unable to help smiling. "Are you very tidy, Monsieur Poirot? Ask my friend Hastings here." The girl turned an inquiring gaze on me. I detailed some of Poirot's minor peculiarities. Toast that had to be made from a square loaf, eggs matching in size, his objection to golf as a game shapeless and haphazard, whose only redeeming feature was the tee boxes. I ended by telling her the famous case which Poirot had solved by his habit of straightening ornaments on the mantelpiece. Poirot sat by, smiling. "He makes a good tale of it, yes," he said, when I had finished, "but on the whole it is true. Figure to yourself, mademoiselle, that I never ceased trying to persuade Hastings to part his hair in the middle instead of on the side. See what an air lopsided and unsymmetrical it gives him." "Oh, then you must disapprove of me, Monsieur Poirot," said Nick. "I wear a side parting, and you must approve of Freddie, who parts her hair in the middle." "He was certainly admiring her the other evening," I put in maliciously. "Now I know the reason." "C'est assez," said Poirot. "I am here on serious business. Mademoiselle, this will of yours, I find it not." "Oh." She wrinkled her brows. "But does it matter so much? After all, I'm not dead, and wills aren't really important till you are dead, are they?" "That is correct. All the same, I interest myself in this will of yours. I have various little ideas concerning it. Think, mademoiselle. Try to remember where you placed it, where you saw it last." "I don't suppose I put it anywhere particular," said Nick. "I never do put things in places. I probably shoved it into a drawer." "You did not put it in the secret panel by any chance?" "The secret what?" "Your maid, Ellen, said that there is a secret panel in the drawing-room, or the library." "Nonsense," said Nick. "I've never heard of such a thing." "Ellen said so?" "Mais oui. It seems she was in service at End House as a young girl. The cook showed it to her. It's the first I've ever heard of it. I suppose grandfather must have known all about it. But if so, he didn't tell me, and I'm sure he would have told me. Monsieur Poirot, are you sure Ellen isn't making it all up?" "No, mademoiselle, I am not at all sure. Il me semble that there is something odd about this Ellen of yours." "Oh, I wouldn't call her odd. William's a half-wit, and the child is a nasty little brute, but Ellen's all right, the essence of respectability." "Did you give her leave to go out and see the fireworks last night, mademoiselle?" "Oh, of course, they always do. They clear up afterwards." "Yet she did not go out." "Oh, yes, she did." "How do you know, mademoiselle?" Well, I suppose I don't know. I told her to go, and she thanked me, so of course I assumed she did go." "On the contrary, she remained in the house." "But how very odd." "You think it odd?" "Well, yes, I do. I'm sure she's never done such a thing before. Did she say why?" "She did not tell me the real reason. Of that I am sure." Nick looked at him questioningly. "Is it important?" Poirot flung out his hands. "That is just what I cannot say, mademoiselle. C'est curieux. I leave it like that." "This panel business, too," said Nick reflectively. "I can't help thinking that it's frightfully queer and unconvincing." "Did she show you where it was?" "She said she could not remember." "I don't believe there is such a thing." "It certainly looks like it. She must be going batty, poor thing. She certainly recounts the histories. She also said that End House was not a good house to live in." Nick gave a little shiver. "Oh, perhaps she's right there," she said slowly. "Sometimes I've felt that way myself. There's a queer feeling in that house." Her eyes grew large and dark. They had a fated look. Poirot hastened to recall her to other topics. "We have wandered from our subject, mademoiselle. The will. The last will and testament of Magdala Buckley." "I put that," said Nick with some pride. I remember putting that. And I said pay all debts and testamentary expenses. I remembered that out of a book I'd read. You did not use a will form, then? No, there wasn't time for that. I was just going off to the nursing home, and besides, Mr. Croft said will forms were very dangerous. It was better to make a simple will, and try not to be too legal. Monsieur Croft? He was there? Yes, it was he who asked me if I'd made one. I'd never have thought of it myself. He said if you died intestate, I said. Yes, that's it. He said if you died intestate, the Crown pinched a lot, and that it would be a pity. Very helpful, the excellent Monsieur Croft. Oh, he was, said Nick warmly. He got Ellen in and her husband to witness it. Oh, of course. What an idiot I've been. We looked at her inquiringly. I've been a perfect idiot, letting you hunt round End House. Charles has got it, of course. My cousin, Charles Vyse. Ah, so that is the explanation. Mr. Croft said a lawyer was the proper person to have charge of it. Très correct, ce bon Monsieur Croft. Men are useful sometimes, said Nick. A lawyer or the bank. That's what he said. And I said Charles would be best. So we stuck it in an envelope and sent it off to him straight away. She lay back on her pillows with a sigh. I'm sorry I've been so frightfully stupid. But it's all right now. Charles has got it, and if you really want to see it, of course he'll show it to you. Not without an authorization from you, said Poirot, smiling. How silly. No, mademoiselle. Merely prudent. Well, I think it's silly. She took a piece of paper from a little stack that lay beside her bed. What shall I say? Let the dog see the rabbit? Comment? I laughed at his startled face. He dictated a form of words, and Nick wrote obediently. Thank you, mademoiselle, said Poirot, as he took it. I'm sorry to have given you such a lot of trouble, but I really had forgotten. You know how one forgets things almost at once. With order and method in the mind, one does not forget. I'll have to take a course of some kind, said Nick. You're giving me an inferiority complex. That is impossible. Au revoir, mademoiselle. He looked round the room. Oh, your flowers are lovely, aren't they? The carnations are from Freddie, and the roses from George, and the lilies from Jim Lazarus. And look here! She pulled the wrapping from a large basket of hothouse grapes by her side. Poirot's face changed. He stepped forward sharply. You have not eaten any of them? No, not yet. Do not do so. You must eat nothing, mademoiselle, that comes in from outside. Nothing. You comprehend? Oh! She stared at him, the colour ebbing slowly from her face. I see. You think it isn't over yet. You think they're still trying, she whispered. He took her hand. Do not think of it. You are safe here. But remember, nothing that comes in from outside. I was conscious of that white, frightened face on the pillow as we left the room. Poirot looked at his watch. Bon, we have just time to catch Monsieur Vyse at his office before he leaves it for lunch. On arrival, we were shown into Charles Vyse's office after the briefest of delays. The young lawyer rose to greet us. He was as formal and unemotional as ever. Good morning, Monsieur Poirot. What can I do for you? Without more ado, Poirot presented the letter Nick had written. He took it and read it, then gazed over the top of it in a perplexed manner. I beg your pardon. I really am at a loss to understand. Has not Mademoiselle Buckley made her meaning clear? In this letter, he tapped it with his fingernail, she asks me to hand over to you a will made by her and entrusted to my keeping in February last. Oh, yes, monsieur. But, my dear sir, no will has been entrusted to my keeping. Comment? As far as I know, my cousin never made a will. I certainly never made one for her. She wrote this herself, I understand, on a sheet of notepaper, and posted it to you. The lawyer shook his head. In that case, all I can say is that I never received it. Oh, really, Monsieur Vyse? I never received anything of the kind, Monsieur Poirot. There was a pause. Then Poirot rose to his feet. In that case, Monsieur Vyse, there is nothing more to be said. There must be some mistake. Certainly, there must be some mistake. He rose also. Good day, Monsieur Vyse. Good day, Monsieur Poirot. And that is that, I remarked, when we were out in the street once more. Précisément. Is he lying, do you think? Impossible to tell. He has the good poker face, Monsieur Vyse, besides looking as though he had swallowed one. One thing is clear. He will not budge from the position he has taken up. He never received the will. That is his point. Or surely Nick will have written acknowledgment of its receipt. Cette petite, she would never bother her head about a thing like that. She dispatched it. It was off her mind. Voila. Besides, on that very day she went into a nursing home to have her appendix out. She had her emotions, in all probability. Well, what do we do now? Parbleu. We go and see Monsieur Croft. Let us see what he can remember about this business. It seems to have been very much his doing. Well, he didn't profit by it in any way, I said thoughtfully. No. I cannot see anything in it from his point of view. He is probably merely the busybody, the man who likes to arrange his neighbours' affairs. Such an attitude was indeed typical of Mr. Croft, I felt. He was the kindly know-all who causes so much exasperation in this world of ours. We found him busy in his shirt-sleeves over a steaming pot in the kitchen. A most savoury smell pervaded the little lodge. He relinquished his cookery with enthusiasm, being clearly eager to talk about the murder. "Half a jiffy," he said. "Walk upstairs. Mother will want to be in on this. She'd never forgive us for talking down here. Cooey! Millie! 2 friends coming up!" Mrs. Croft greeted us warmly and was eager for news of Nick. I liked her much better than her husband. "That poor dear girl," she said. "In a nursing home, you say? Had a complete breakdown, I shouldn't wonder. A dreadful business, Monsieur Poirot, perfectly dreadful. An innocent girl like that shot dead. It doesn't bear thinking about. It doesn't indeed. And no lawless, wild part of the world either. Right here in the heart of the old country. Kept me awake all night, it did." "It's made me nervous about going out and leaving you, old lady," said her husband, who had put on his coat and joined us. "I don't like to think of you having been left alone here yesterday evening. Gives me the shivers." "You're not going to leave me again, I can tell you," said Mrs. Croft. "Not after dark, anyway. And I'm thinking I'd like to leave this part of the world as soon as possible. I never shall feel the same about it. I shouldn't think poor Nicky Buckley could ever bear to sleep in that house again." It was a little difficult to reach the object of our visit. Both Mr. and Mrs. Croft talked so much and were so anxious to know all about everything. Were the poor dead girl's relations coming down? When was the funeral? Was there to be an inquest? What did the police think? Had they any clue yet? Was it true that a man had been arrested in Plymouth? Then, having answered all these questions, they were insistent on offering us lunch. Only Poirot's mendacious statement that we were obliged to hurry back to lunch with the chief constable saved us. At last, a momentary pause occurred, and Poirot got in the question he had been waiting to ask. "Why, of course," said Mr. Croft. He pulled the blind cord up and down twice, frowning at it abstractedly. "I remember all about it. Must have been when we first came here. I remember. Appendicitis. That's what the doctor said." "And probably not appendicitis at all," interrupted Mrs. Croft. "These doctors, they always like cutting you up if they can. It wasn't the kind you have to operate on anyhow. She'd had indigestion, and one thing and another, and they'd x-rayed her, and they said out it had better come. And there she was, poor little soul, just going off to one of those nasty homes." "I just asked her," said Mr. Croft, "if she'd made a will. More as a joke than anything else." "Yes?" "And she wrote it out there and then. Talked about getting a will form at the post office. But I advised her not to. A lot of trouble they cause sometimes. So a man told me. Anyway, her cousin's a lawyer. He could draw her out a proper one afterwards if everything was all right. As, of course, I knew it would be. This was just a precautionary matter." "Who witnessed it?" "Oh, Ellen, the maid, and her husband." "And afterwards? What was done with it?" "Oh, we posted it to Vyse, the lawyer, you know." "You know that it was posted?" "My dear Monsieur Poirot, I posted it myself, right in this box here by the gate." "So, if Monsieur Vyse says he never got it—" Croft stared. "Do you mean that it got lost in the post? Ah, but surely that's impossible." "Anyway, you are certain that you posted it?" "Certain sure," said Mr. Croft heartily. "I'll take my oath on that any day." "Ah, well," said Poirot, "fortunately it does not matter. Mademoiselle is not likely to die just yet awhile. Et voilà, said Poirot, when we were out of earshot and walking down to the hotel. Who is lying, Monsieur Croft or Monsieur Charles Vyse? I must confess I see no reason why Monsieur Croft should be lying. To suppress the will would be of no advantage to him, especially when he had been instrumental in getting it made. No, his statement seems clear enough and tallies exactly with what was told us by Mademoiselle Nick. But all the same— Yes? All the same, I am glad that Monsieur Croft was doing the cooking when we arrived. He left an excellent impression of a greasy thumb and first finger on a corner of the newspaper that covered the kitchen table. I managed to tear it off unseen by him. We will send it to our good friend Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard. There is just a chance that he might know something about it. Yes. You know, Hastings, I cannot help feeling that our genial Monsieur Croft is a little too good to be genuine. And now, he added, le déjeuner. I faint with hunger. Chapter 15. Strange Behaviour of Frederica. Poirot's inventions about the chief constable were proved not to have been so mendacious after all. Colonel Weston called upon us soon after lunch. He was a tall man of military carriage with considerable good looks. He had a suitable reverence for Poirot's achievements, with which he seemed to be well acquainted. "Marvellous piece of luck, us having you down here, Monsieur Poirot," he said again and again. His one fear was that he should be compelled to call in the assistance of Scotland Yard. He was anxious to solve the mystery and catch the criminal without their aid, hence his delight at Poirot's presence in the neighbourhood. Poirot, as far as I could judge, took him completely into his confidence. "Do you start business?" said the Colonel. "Never heard of anything like it. Well, the girl ought to be safe enough in a nursing home. Still, you can't keep her there forever." "That, Monsieur le Colonel, is just the difficulty. There is only one way of dealing with it." "And that is?" "We must lay our hands on the person responsible." "Well, if what you suspect is true, that isn't going to be so easy." "Ah, je le sais bien." "Evidence. Getting evidence is going to be the devil." He frowned abstractedly. "Always difficult, these cases where there's no routine work. If we could get hold of the pistol—" "In all probability it is at the bottom of the sea. That is, if the murderer had any sense." "Ah," said Colonel Weston, "but often they haven't. You'd be surprised at the fool things people do. I'm not talking of murders. We don't have many murders down in these parts, I'm glad to say, but in ordinary police court cases, the sheer damn foolishness of these people would surprise you." "They are of a different mentality, though." "Yes, perhaps. If Vyse is the chap, well, we'll have our work cut out. He's a cautious man and a sound lawyer. He'll not give himself away. The woman, well, there would be more hope there. 10 to 1 she'll try again. Women have no patience." He rose. "Inquest tomorrow morning. Coroner will work in with us and give away as little as possible. We want to keep things dark at present." He was turning towards the door when he suddenly came back. "Upon my soul, I'd forgotten the very thing that will interest you most, and that I want your opinion about." Sitting down again, he drew from his pocket a torn scrap of paper with writing on it, and handed it to Poirot. "My police found this when they were searching the grounds, not far from where you were all watching the fireworks. It's the only suggestive thing they did find." Poirot smoothed it out. The writing was large and straggling. It read, "Must have money at once. If not, you— What will happen? I'm warning you." Poirot frowned. He read it and reread it. "This is interesting," he said. "May I keep it?" "Well, certainly. There are no fingerprints on it. I'll be glad if you can make anything of it." Colonel Weston got to his feet again. "I really must be off. Inquest tomorrow, as I said. By the way, you are not being called as witness. Only Captain Hastings. Don't want the newspaper people to get wise to your being on the job." "I comprehend. What of the relations of the poor young lady?" "The father and mother are coming from Yorkshire today. They'll arrive about 5:30. Poor souls. I'm heartily sorry for them. They're taking the body back with them the following day." He shook his head. "Unpleasant business. I'm not enjoying this, Monsieur Poirot." "Who could, Monsieur le Colonel? It is, as you say, an unpleasant business." When he had gone, Poirot examined the scrap of paper once more. "An important clue?" I asked. He shrugged his shoulders. "How can one tell? There is a hint of blackmail about it. Someone of our party that night was being pressed for money in a very unpleasant way. Of course, it is possible that it was one of the strangers." He looked at the writing through a little magnifying glass. "Does this writing look at all familiar to you, Hastings?" "It reminds me a little of something. Ah, I have it. That note of Mrs. Rice's." "Yes," said Poirot slowly. "There are resemblances. Decidedly, there are resemblances. It is curious. Yet I do not think that this is the writing of Madame Rice." "Come in," he said, as a knock came at the door. It was Commander Challenger. "I just looked in," he explained. "Wanted to know if you were any further forward." "Parbleu," said Poirot. "At this moment I am feeling that I am considerably further back. I seem to progress en reculant." "Oh, that's bad. But I don't really believe it, Monsieur Poirot. I've been hearing all about you, and what a wonderful chap you are. Never had a failure, they say." "Oh, that is not true," said Poirot. "I had a bad failure, in Belgium, in 1893. You recollect, Hastings? I recounted it to you. The affair of the box of chocolates." "I remember," I said, and I smiled. For at the time that Poirot told me that tale, he had instructed me to say chocolate box to him if ever I should fancy he was growing conceited. He was then bitterly offended when I used the magical words only a minute and a quarter later. "Oh, well," said Challenger, "that is such a long time ago it hardly counts. You are going to get to the bottom of this, aren't you?" "That I swear, on the word of Hercule Poirot. I am the dog who stays on the scent and does not leave it." "Good. Got any ideas?" "I have suspicions of two people." "Well, I suppose I mustn't ask you who they are." "I should not tell you. You see, I might possibly be in error." "My alibi is satisfactory, I trust?" said Challenger, with a faint twinkle. Poirot smiled indulgently at the bronzed face in front of him. "You left Devonport at a few minutes past 8:30. You arrived here at 5 minutes past 10. 20 minutes after the crime had been committed. But the distance from Devonport is only just over 30 miles, and you have often done it in an hour since the road is good, so you see your alibi is not good at all." "Well, You comprehend, I inquire into everything. Your alibi, as I say, is not good. But there are other things besides alibis. You would, I think, like to marry Mademoiselle Nick." The sailor's face flushed. I've always wanted to marry her," he said huskily. "Precisely. Eh bien, Mademoiselle Nick was engaged to another man, a reason, perhaps, for killing the other man. But that is unnecessary. He dies the death of a hero. So it is true that Nick was engaged to Michael Seaton. There's a rumour to that effect all over the town this morning. Yes, it is interesting how soon news spreads. You never suspected it before?" "I knew Nick was engaged to someone. She told me so 2 days ago, but she didn't give me a clue as to whom it was." "It was Michael Seaton. Entre nous, he has left her, I fancy, a very pretty fortune. Ah, assuredly it is not a moment for killing Mademoiselle Nick, from your point of view. She weeps for her lover now, but the heart consoles itself. She is young, and I think, monsieur, that she is very fond of you." Challenger was silent for a moment or two. "If it should be," he murmured. There was a tap on the door. It was Frederica Rice. "I've been looking for you," she said to Challenger. "They told me you were here. I wanted to know if you'd got my wristwatch back yet." "Oh, yes, I called for it this morning." He took it from his pocket and handed it to her. It was a watch of rather an unusual shape, round like a globe, set on a strap of plain black moire. I remembered that I'd seen one much the same shape on Nick Buckley's wrist. "I hope it will keep better time now." "It's rather a bore. Something's always going wrong with it." "It is for beauty, madame, and not for utility," said Poirot. "Or can't one have both?" She looked from one to the other of us. Am I interrupting a conference? No, indeed, madame. We were talking gossip, not the crime. We were saying how quickly news spreads, how that everyone now knows that Mademoiselle Nick was engaged to that brave airman who perished. So Nick was engaged to Michael Seton, exclaimed Frederica. It surprises you, madame? Well, it does a little. I don't know why. Certainly I did think he was very taken with her last autumn. They went about a lot together, and then after Christmas they both seemed to cool off. As far as I know, they hardly met. The secret, they kept it very well. That was because of old Sir Matthew, I suppose. He was really a little off his head, I think. You had no suspicion, madame? And yet Mademoiselle was such an intimate friend. Nick's a close little devil when she likes, murmured Frederica. But I understand now why she's been so nervy lately. Oh, I ought to have guessed from something she said only the other day. Your little friend is very attractive, madame. Old Jim Lazarus used to think so at one time, said Challenger, with his loud, rather tactless laugh. Oh, Jim! She shrugged her shoulders, but I thought she was annoyed. She turned to Poirot. Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, did you— She stopped. Her tall figure swayed, and her face turned whiter still. Her eyes were fixed on the centre of the table. You are not well, madame. I pushed forward a chair, helped her to sink into it. She shook her head, murmured, I'm all right, and leaned forward, her face between her hands. We watched her awkwardly. She sat up in a minute. How absurd. George, darling, don't look so worried. Let's talk about murders. Something exciting. I want to know if Monsieur Poirot is on the track. It is early to say, madame, said Poirot noncommittally. But you have ideas, yes? Perhaps, but I need a great deal more evidence. Oh. She sounded uncertain. Suddenly she rose. I've got a head. I think I'll go and lie down. Perhaps tomorrow they'll let me see Nick. She left the room abruptly. Challenger frowned. You never know what that woman's up to. Nick may have been fond of her, but I don't believe she was fond of Nick. But there, you can't tell with women. It's darling, darling, darling all the time, and damn you would probably express it much better. Are you going out, Monsieur Poirot? For Poirot had risen and was carefully brushing a speck off his hat. Yes, I am going into the town. I've got nothing to do. May I come with you? Assuredly. It would be a pleasure. We left the room. Poirot, with an apology, went back. My stick, he explained, as he rejoined us. Challenger winced slightly, and indeed the stick, with its embossed gold band, was somewhat ornate. Poirot's first visit was to a florist. I must send some flowers to Mademoiselle Nick, he explained. He proved difficult to suit. In the end, he chose an ornate gold basket to be filled with orange carnations, the whole to be tied up with a large blue bow. The shopwoman gave him a card, and he wrote on it with a flourish, with the compliments of Hercule Poirot. I sent her some flowers this morning, said Challenger. I might send her some fruit. Inutile, said Poirot. What? I said it was useless. The eatable, it is not permitted. Well, who says so? I say so. I have made the rule. It has already been impressed on Mademoiselle Nick. She understands. Good Lord, said Challenger. He looked thoroughly startled. He stared at Poirot curiously. So that's it, is it? He said. You're still afraid. Chapter 16. Interview with Mr. Whitfield. The inquest was a dry proceeding, mere bare bones. There was evidence of identification. Then I gave evidence of finding the body. Medical evidence followed. The inquest was adjourned for a week. The St. Loup murder had jumped into prominence in the daily press. It had, in fact, succeeded Seton still missing, unknown fate of missing airman. Now that Seton was dead, and due tribute had been paid to his memory, a new sensation was due. The St. Loup mystery was a godsend to papers at their wits' end for news in the month of August. After the inquest, having successfully dodged reporters, I met Poirot, and we had an interview with the Reverend Giles Buckley and his wife. Maggie's father and mother were a charming pair, completely unworldly and unsophisticated. Mrs. Buckley was a woman of character, tall and fair, and showing very plainly her Scottish ancestry. Her husband was a small man, grey-haired, with a diffident, appealing manner. Poor souls, they were completely dazed by the misfortune that had overtaken them and robbed them of a well-beloved daughter. Our Maggie, as they called her. "I can scarcely realize it even now," said Mr. Buckley. "Such a dear child, Monsieur Poirot. So quiet and unselfish, always thinking of others. Who could wish to harm her?" "I could hardly understand the telegram," said Mrs. Buckley. "Why, it was only the morning before that we'd seen her off." "In the midst of life we are in death," murmured her husband. "Colonel Weston has been very kind," said Mrs. Buckley. "He assures us that everything is being done to find the man who did this thing. He must be a madman. No other explanation is possible. Madame, I cannot tell you how I sympathize with you in your loss, and how I admire your bravery." "Breaking down would not bring Maggie back to us," said Mrs. Buckley sadly. "My wife is wonderful," said the clergyman. "Her faith and courage are greater than mine. It is all so bewildering, Monsieur Poirot." I know, monsieur." "You are a great detective, Monsieur Poirot," said Mrs. Buckley. "It has been said, madame." "Oh, I know. Even in our remote country village we've heard of you. You're going to find out the truth, Monsieur Poirot." "I shall not rest until I do, madame." "It will be revealed to you, Monsieur Poirot," quavered the clergyman. "Evil cannot go unpunished." "Evil never goes unpunished, monsieur. But the punishment is sometimes secret." "What do you mean by that, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot only shook his head. "Poor little Nick," said Mrs. Buckley. "I'm really sorriest of all for her. I had a most pathetic letter. She says she feels she asked Maggie down here to her death." "That is morbid," said Mr. Buckley. "Yes, but I know how she feels. I wish they would let me see her. It seems so extraordinary not to let her own family visit her." "Doctors and nurses are very strict," said Poirot evasively. "They make the rules so, and nothing will change them, and doubtless they fear for her the emotion, the natural emotion, she would experience on seeing you." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Buckley doubtfully, "but I don't hold with nursing homes. Nick would do much better if they let her come back with me, right away from this place." "It is possible, but I fear they will not agree. It is long since you have seen Mademoiselle Buckley?" "I haven't seen her since last autumn. She was at Scarborough. Maggie went over and spent the day with her, and then she came back and spent a night with us. She's a pretty creature, though I can't say I like her friends, and the life she leads. Well, it's hardly her fault, poor child. She has had no upbringing of any kind." "It is a strange house, End House," said Poirot thoughtfully. "I don't like it," said Mrs. Buckley. "I never have. There's something all wrong about that house. I disliked old Sir Nicholas intensely. He made me shiver." "Not a good man, I'm afraid," said her husband. "But he had a curious charm." "Well, I never felt it," said Mrs. Buckley. "There's an evil feeling about that house. I wish we'd never let our Maggie go there." "Ah, wishing," said Mr. Buckley, and shook his head. "Well," said Poirot, "I must not intrude upon you any longer. I only wish to proffer to you my deep sympathy." "You've been very kind, Monsieur Poirot, and we're indeed grateful for all that you're doing. You return to Yorkshire when?" "Tomorrow." "A sad journey. Goodbye, Monsieur Poirot, and thank you again." "Very simple, delightful people," I said after we had left. Poirot nodded. "It makes the heart ache, does it not, mon ami? A tragedy so useless, so purposeless. Cette jeune fille. Ah! But I reproach myself bitterly. I, Hercule Poirot, was on the spot, and I did not prevent the crime. Nobody could have prevented it." "You speak without reflection, Hastings. No ordinary person could have prevented it. But of what good is it to be Hercule Poirot with grey cells of a finer quality than other people's, if you do not manage to do what ordinary people cannot? Well, of course, I said, if you're going to put it like that. Yes, indeed. I am abased, downhearted, completely abased. I reflected that Poirot's abasement was strangely like other people's conceit, but I prudently forbore from making any remark. And now, he said, en avant to London. London? Mais oui. We shall catch the 2 o'clock train very comfortably. All is peaceful here. Mademoiselle is safe in the nursing home. No one can harm her. The watchdogs, therefore, can take leave of absence. There are 1 or 2 little pieces of information that I require. Our first proceeding on arriving in London was to call upon the late Captain Seaton's solicitors, Messrs. Whitfield, Pargeter, and Whitfield. Poirot had arranged for an appointment beforehand, and although it was past 6 o'clock, we were soon closeted with Mr. Whitfield, the head of the firm. He was a very urbane and impressive person. He had in front of him a letter from the chief constable, and another from some high official at Scotland Yard. This is all very irregular and unusual, Monsieur, Poirot, he said, as he polished his eyeglasses. Quite so, Monsieur Whitfield. But then murder is also irregular, and I am glad to say sufficiently unusual. True, but rather far-fetched. To make a connection between this murder and my late client's bequest, huh? I think not. Ah, you think not? Well, under the circumstances, and I must admit that Sir Henry puts it very strongly in his letter, I shall be happy to do anything that is in my power. You acted as legal adviser to the late Captain Seaton. To all the Seaton family, my dear sir. We have done so. Our firm have done so, I mean, for the last 100 years. Parfaitement. The late Sir Matthew Seaton made a will. We made it for him. And he left his fortune how? There were several bequests, one to the Natural History Museum, but the bulk of his I may say very large fortune he left to Captain Michael Seaton absolutely. He had no other near relations. A very large fortune, you say? The late Sir Matthew was the 2nd richest man in England, replied Mr. Whitfield composedly. He had somewhat peculiar views, had he not? Mr. Whitfield looked at him severely. A millionaire, Monsieur Poirot, is allowed to be eccentric. It is almost expected of him. Poirot received his correction meekly and asked another question. His death was unexpected, I understand. Most unexpected. Sir Matthew enjoyed remarkably good health. He had an internal growth, however, which no one had suspected. It reached a vital tissue, and an immediate operation was necessary. The operation was, as always on these occasions, completely successful. But Sir Matthew died. And his fortune passed to Captain Seaton. That is so. Captain Seaton had, I understand, made a will before leaving England. If you can call it a will, yes, said Mr. Whitfield with strong distaste. Is it legal? It is perfectly legal. The intention of the testator is plain, and it is properly witnessed. Oh, yes, it is legal. But you do not approve of it. My dear sir, what are we for? I had often wondered. Having once had occasion to make a perfectly simple will myself, I had been appalled at the length and verbiage that resulted from my solicitor's office. The truth of the matter was, continued Mr. Whitfield, that at the time Captain Seaton had little or nothing to leave. He was dependent on the allowance he received from his uncle. He felt, I suppose, that anything would do. And had thought correctly, I whispered to myself. And the terms of this will? Asked Poirot. He leaves everything of which he dies possessed to his affianced wife, Miss Magdala Buckley, absolutely. He names me as his executor. Then Miss Buckley inherits? Certainly, Miss Buckley inherits. And if Miss Buckley had happened to die last Monday? Captain Seaton having predeceased her, the money would go to whomever she had named in her will, as residuary legatee, or, failing a will, to her next of kin. I may say, added Mr. Whitfield with an air of enjoyment, that death duties would have been enormous. 3 deaths, remember, in rapid succession. He shook his head. Enormous. But there would have been something left, murmured Poirot meekly. My dear sir, as I told you, Sir Matthew was the second richest man in England. Poirot rose. Thank you, Monsieur Whitfield, very much for the information that you have given me. Not at all, not at all. I may say that I shall be in communication with Miss Buckley. Indeed, I believe the letter has already gone. I shall be happy to be of any service I can to her. She is a young lady, said Poirot, who could do with some sound legal advice. There will be fortune-hunters, I'm afraid, said Mr. Whitfield, shaking his head. It seems indicated, agreed Poirot. Good day, monsieur. Goodbye, Monsieur Poirot. Glad to have been of service to you. Your name is, familiar to me. He said this kindly, with an air of one making a valuable admission. It's all exactly as you thought, Poirot, I said, when we were outside. Mon ami, it was bound to be. It could not be any other way. We will now go to the Cheshire Cheese, where Japp meets us for an early dinner. We found Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard awaiting us at the chosen rendezvous. He greeted Poirot with every sign of warmth. Years since I've seen you, Monsieur Poirot. Thought you were growing vegetable marrows in the country. I tried, Japp, I tried. But even when you grow vegetable marrows, you cannot get away from murder. He sighed. I knew of what he was thinking. That strange affair at Fernley Park. How I regretted that I had been far away at that time. And Captain Hastings, too, said Japp. How are you, sir? Oh, very fit, thanks, I said. And now, there are more murders, continued Japp facetiously. As you say, more murders. Well, you mustn't be depressed, old cock, said Japp. Even if you can't see your way clear. Well, you can't go about at your time of life and expect to have the success you used to do. We all of us get stale as the years go by. Got to give the young uns a chance, you know. And yet the old dog is the one who knows the tricks, murmured Poirot. He is cunning. He does not leave the scent. Oh, well, we're talking about human beings, not dogs. Is there so much difference? Well, it depends on how you look at things. But you're a caution, isn't he, Captain Hastings? Always was. Looks much the same, hair a bit thinner on top, but the face fungus fuller than ever. Huh? Said Poirot. What is that? He's congratulating you on your moustaches, I said soothingly. They are luxuriant, yes, said Poirot, complacently caressing them. Japp went off into a roar of laughter. Well, he said, after a minute or two, I've done your bit of business. Those fingerprints you sent me. Yes, said Poirot eagerly. Nothing doing. Whoever the gentleman may be, he hasn't passed through our hands. On the other hand, I wired to Melbourne, and nobody of that description or name is known there. Ah. So there may be something fishy after all, but he's not one of the lads. As to the other business, went on Japp. Yes? Lazarus and Son have a good reputation, quite straight and honourable in their dealings. Sharp, of course, but that's another matter. You've got to be sharp in business. But they're all right. They're in a bad way, though, financially, I mean. Oh, is that so? Yes, the slump in pictures has hit them badly, and antique furniture, too. All this modern continental stuff coming into fashion. They built new premises last year, and, well, as I say, they're not far from Queer Street. I am much obliged to you. Not at all. That sort of thing isn't my line, as you know, but I made a point of finding out as you wanted to know. We can always get information. My good Japp, what would I do without you? Oh, that's all right. Always glad to oblige an old friend. I let you in on some pretty good cases in the old days, didn't I? This, I realized, was Japp's way of acknowledging indebtedness to Poirot, who had solved many a case which had baffled the inspector. They were the good days, yes. I wouldn't mind having a chat with you now and again, even in these days. Your methods may be old-fashioned, but you've got your head screwed on the right way, Monsieur Poirot. What about my other question? The Dr. McAllister. Oh, him. Yeah, he's a woman's doctor. I don't mean a gynecologist, I mean one of those nerve doctors. Tell you to sleep in purple walls and orange ceiling. Talk to you about your libido, whatever that is. Tell you to let it rip. He's a bit of a quack, if you ask me. But he gets the women all right. They flock to him. Goes abroad a good deal. Does some kind of medical work in Paris, I believe. "Why Dr. McAllister?" I asked, bewildered. I had never heard of the name. "Where does he come in?" "Dr. McAllister is the uncle of Commander Challenger," explained Poirot. "You remember he referred to an uncle who was a doctor?" "How thorough you are," I said. "Did you think he had operated on Sir Matthew?" "Oh, he's not a surgeon," said Japp. "Mon ami," said Poirot, "I like to inquire into everything. Hercule Poirot is a good dog. The good dog follows the scent, and if, regrettably, there is no scent to follow, he noses around, seeking always something that is not very nice. So also does Hercule Poirot, and often, oh, so often, does he find it." "It's not a nice profession, ours," said Japp. "Stilton, did you say? I don't mind if I do. No, it's not a nice profession. And yours is worse than mine. Not official, you see, and therefore a lot more worming yourself into places in underhand ways." "I do not disguise myself, Japp. Never have I disguised myself." "You couldn't," said Japp. "You're unique. Once seen, never forgotten." Poirot looked at him rather doubtfully. "Only my fun," said Japp. "Don't mind me. Glass of port? Well, if you say so." The evening became thoroughly harmonious. We were soon in the middle of reminiscences. This case, that case, and the other. I must say that I, too, enjoyed talking over the past. Those had been good days. How old and experienced I felt now. Poor old Poirot. He was perplexed by this case. I could see that. His powers were not what they were. I had the feeling that he was going to fail, that the murderer of Maggie Buckley would never be brought to book. "Courage, my friend," said Poirot, slapping me on the shoulder. "All is not lost. Do not pull the long face, I beg of you." "Oh, that's all right. I'm all right." "And so am I. And so is Japp." "We're all right," declared Japp hilariously. And on this pleasant note we parted. The following morning we journeyed back to St. Lou. On arrival at the hotel, Poirot rang up the nursing home and asked to speak to Nick. Suddenly, I saw his face change. He almost dropped the instrument. "Comment? What is that? Say it again, I beg." He waited for a moment or two, listening. Then he said, Yes, I will come at once." He turned a pale face to me. "Why did I go away, Hastings? Mon Dieu! Why did I go away? What has happened? Mademoiselle Nick is dangerously ill. Cocaine poisoning. They have got at her after all. Mon Dieu, why did I go away?" Chapter 17. A Box of Chocolates. All the way to the nursing home, Poirot murmured and muttered to himself. He was full of self-reproach. "I should have known," he groaned. "I should have known. And yet what could I do? I took every precaution. It is impossible. It is impossible. No one could get to her. Who has disobeyed my orders?" At the nursing home, we were shown into a little room downstairs, and after a few minutes Dr. Graham came to us. He looked exhausted and white. "She'll do," he said. "It's going to be all right. The trouble was knowing how much she'd taken of the damned stuff." "What was it?" "Cocaine." "She will live?" Yes, she'll live." "But how did it happen? How did they get at her? Who has been allowed in?" Poirot fairly danced with impotent excitement. "Nobody has been allowed in." "Impossible." "It's true, but then it was a box of chocolates. Ah, sacré! And I told her to eat nothing that came from outside." "I don't know about that. It's hard work keeping a girl from a box of chocolates. She only ate one, thank goodness." "Was the cocaine in all the chocolates?" "No. The girl ate one. There were 2 others, in the top layer. The rest were all right." "How was it done?" "Quite clumsily. Chocolate cut in half, the cocaine mixed with the filling, and the chocolate stuck together again. Amateurishly. What you might call a homemade job." Poirot groaned. "Ah, if I knew... Can I see Mademoiselle?" "If you come back in an hour, I think you can see her," said the doctor. "Pull yourself together, man. She isn't going to die." For another hour we walked the streets of St. Lou. I did my best to distract Poirot's mind, pointing out to him that all was well, that, after all, no mischief had been done. But he only shook his head and repeated at intervals, I am afraid, Hastings. I am afraid. And the strange way he said it made me, too, feel afraid. Once he caught me by the arm. Listen, my friend, I am all wrong. I have been all wrong from the beginning. Well, you mean it isn't the money? No, I am right about that, oh yes. But those two. It is too simple, too easy, that. There is another twist still, yes, there is something. And then, in an outburst of indignation, "Ah, cette petite! Did I not forbid her? Did I not say, 'Do not touch anything from outside'? And she disobeys me. Me, Hercule Poirot. Are not 4 escapes from death enough for her? Must she take a 5th chance? Ah, c'est inouï." At last we made our way back. After a brief wait, we were conducted upstairs. Nick was sitting up in bed. The pupils of her eyes were wildly dilated. She looked feverish, and her hands kept twitching violently. "At it again," she murmured. Poirot experienced real emotion at the sight of her. He cleared his throat and took her hand in his. "Ah, mademoiselle, mademoiselle." "I shouldn't care," she said defiantly, "if they had got me this time. I'm sick of it all, sick of it. Pauvre petite. Something in me doesn't like to give them best. That is the spirit. Le sport. You must be the good sport, mademoiselle." "Your old nursing home hasn't been so safe after all," said Nick. "If you had obeyed orders, mademoiselle." She looked faintly astonished. "But I have. Did I not impress upon you that you were to eat nothing that came from outside?" "No more I did. But these chocolates, well, they were all right. You sent them." "What is that you say, mademoiselle? You sent them? Me? Never. Never anything of the kind." "But you did. Your card was in the box." "What?" Nick made a spasmodic gesture towards the table by the bed. The nurse came forward. "You want the card that was in the box?" "Yes, please, nurse." There was a moment's pause. The nurse returned to the room with it in her hand. "Here it is." I gasped. So did Poirot. For on the card, in flourishing handwriting, were written the same words that I had seen Poirot inscribe on the card that accompanied the basket of flowers, with the compliments of Hercule Poirot. Sacré tonnerre! "You see?" said Nick accusingly. "I did not write this," cried Poirot. "What?" "And yet," murmured Poirot, "and yet it is my handwriting." "I know. It's exactly the same as the card that came with the orange carnations. I never doubted that the chocolates came from you." Poirot shook his head. "How should you doubt? Oh, the devil! The clever, cruel devil! To think of that! Ah, but he has genius, this man. Genius! With the compliments of Hercule Poirot. So simple. Yes, but one had to think of it. And I did not think. I omitted to foresee this move." Nick moved restlessly. "Do not agitate yourself, mademoiselle. You are blameless, blameless. It is I that am to blame. Miserable imbecile that I am. I should have foreseen this move. Yes, I should have foreseen it." His chin dropped on his breast. He looked the picture of misery. "I really think," said the nurse. She had been hovering nearby, a disapproving expression on her face. "Huh? Oh, yes. Yes, I will go. Courage, mademoiselle. This is the last mistake I will make. I am ashamed, desolated. I have been tricked, outwitted, as though I were a little schoolboy. But it shall not happen again. No. I promise you. Come, Hastings." Poirot's first proceeding was to interview the matron. She was naturally terribly upset over the whole business. "It seems incredible to me, Monsieur Poirot, absolutely incredible that a thing like that should happen in my nursing home." Poirot was sympathetic and tactful. Having soothed her sufficiently, he began to inquire into the circumstances of the arrival of the fatal packet. Here the matron declared he would do best to interview the orderly who had been on duty at the time of its arrival. The man in question, whose name was Hood, was a stupid but honest-looking young fellow of about 22. He looked nervous and frightened. Poirot put him at his ease, however. "No blame can be attached to you," he said kindly, "but I want you to tell me exactly how and when this parcel arrived." The orderly looked puzzled. "It's difficult to say, sir," he said slowly. "Lots of people come in and inquire and leave things for the different patients." "Well, the nurse says this came last night," I said, "about 6 o'clock. The lad's face brightened. "Oh, I do remember now, sir. A gentleman brought it." "A thin-faced gentleman? Fair-haired?" "Well, he was fair-haired, but I don't know about thin-faced." "Would Charles Vyse bring it himself?" I murmured to Poirot. I had forgotten that the lad would know a local name. "It wasn't Mr. Vyse," he said. "I know him. It was a bigger gentleman. Handsome-looking. Came in a big car." "Lazarus!" I exclaimed. Poirot shot me a warning glance, and I regretted my precipitance. "He came in a large car, and he left this parcel. It was addressed to Miss Buckley?" "Yes, sir." "And what did you do with it?" "I didn't touch it, sir. Nurse took it up." "Quite so, but you touched it when you took it from the gentleman, n'est-ce pas?" "Oh, well that, yes, of course, sir. I took it from him and put it on the table." "Which table? Show me, if you please." The orderly led us into the hall. The front door was open. Close to it in the hall was a long marble-topped table, on which lay letters and parcels. "Everything that comes is put on here, sir. Then the nurses take things up to the patients." "Do you remember at what time this parcel was left?" "Must have been about 5:30, or a little after. I know the post had just been, and that's usually at about 5:30. It was a pretty busy afternoon. A lot of people leaving flowers and coming to see patients." "Thank you. Now, I think, we will see the nurse who took up the parcel." This proved to be one of the probationers, a fluffy little person, all agog with excitement. She remembered taking the parcel up at 6 o'clock, when she came on duty. 6 o'clock, murmured Poirot. Then it must have been 20 minutes or so that the parcel was lying on the table downstairs. Pardon? Nothing, mademoiselle. Continue. You took the parcel to Miss Buckley. Yes, there were several things for her. There was this box and some flowers also, sweet peas, from a Mr. and Mrs. Croft, I think. I took them up at the same time, and there was a parcel that had come by post, and curiously enough, that was a box of Fuller's chocolates also. Comment? A second box? Yes, rather a coincidence. Miss Buckley opened them both. She said, "Oh, what a shame, I'm not allowed to eat them." Then she opened the lids to look inside and see if they were both just the same, and your card was in one of them, and she said, "Take the other impure box away, nurse. I might have got them mixed up." Oh, dear. Whoever would have thought of such a thing? Seems like an Edgar Wallace, doesn't it? Poirot cut short this flood of speech. 2 boxes, you say? From whom was the other box? There was no name inside. And which was the one that came, that had the appearance of coming from me? The one by post, or the other? I declare now, I can't remember. Shall I go up and ask Miss Buckley? If you would be so amiable. She ran up the stairs. 2 boxes, murmured Poirot. There is confusion for you. The nurse returned, breathless. Miss Buckley isn't sure. She unwrapped them both before she looked inside, but she thinks it wasn't the box that came by post. Huh? Said Poirot, a little confused. The box from you was the one that didn't come by post. At least she thinks so, but she isn't quite sure. Diable, said Poirot, as we walked away. Is no one ever quite sure? In detective books, yes, but life, real life, is always full of muddle. Am I sure myself about anything at all? No. No. 1,000 times no. Lazarus, I said. Yes. That is a surprise, is it not? Shall you say anything to him about it? Assuredly. I shall be interested to see how he takes it. By the way, we might as well exaggerate the serious condition of Mademoiselle. It will do no harm to let it be assumed that she is at death's door. You comprehend? The solemn face. Ah, yes. Admirable. You resemble closely an undertaker. C'est tout à fait bien. We were lucky in finding Lazarus. He was bending over the bonnet of his car outside the hotel. Poirot went straight up to him. Yesterday evening, Monsieur Lazarus, you left a box of chocolates for Mademoiselle, he began without preamble. Lazarus looked rather surprised. Yes? That was very amiable of you. As a matter of fact, they were from Freddie, from Mrs. Rice. She asked me to get them. Oh, I see. I took them round in the car. I comprehend. He was silent for a minute or two, and then said, Madame Rice, where is she? I think she's in the lounge. We found Frederica having tea. She looked up at us with an anxious face. What is this I hear about Nick being taken ill? It is a most mysterious affair, madame. Tell me, did you send her a box of chocolates yesterday? Yes. At least she asked me to get them for her. She asked you to get them for her? Yes. But she was not allowed to see anyone. How did you see her? I didn't. She telephoned. Ah. And she said, what? Would I get her a 2-pound box of Fuller's chocolates? How did her voice sound? Weak? No, not at all, quite strong. But different somehow. I didn't realize it was she speaking at first, until she told you who she was. Yes. Are you sure, madame, that it was your friend? Frederica looked startled. Why, of course it was. Who else could it have been? That is an interesting question, madame. You don't mean... Could you swear, madame, that it was your friend's voice, apart from what she said? No, said Frederica slowly. I couldn't. Her voice was certainly different. I thought it was the phone, or perhaps being ill. If she had not told you who she was, you would not have recognized it? No. No, I don't think I should. Who was it, Monsieur Poirot? Who was it? That is what I mean to know, madame. The graveness of his face seemed to awaken her suspicions. Is Nick? Has anything happened? She asked breathlessly. Poirot nodded. She is ill, dangerously ill. Those chocolates, madame, were poisoned. The chocolates I sent her? But that's impossible, impossible. Not impossible, madame, since Mademoiselle is at death's door. Oh, my God! She hid her face in her hands, then raised it, white and quivering. I don't understand. I don't understand. The other, yes, but not this. They couldn't be poisoned. Nobody ever touched them but me and Jim. You're making some dreadful mistake, Monsieur Poirot. It is not I that make a mistake, even though my name was in the box. She stared at him blankly. If Mademoiselle Nick dies, he said, and made a threatening gesture with his hand. She gave a low cry. He turned away, and taking me by the arm, went up to the sitting-room. He flung his hat on the table. I understand nothing, but nothing. I am in the dark. I am a little child. Who stands to gain by Mademoiselle's death? Madame Rice. Who buys the chocolates and admits it and tells a story of being rung up on the telephone that cannot hold water for a minute? Madame Rice. It is too simple, too stupid. And she is not stupid. No. Well, then. But she takes cocaine, Hastings. I am certain she takes cocaine. There is no mistaking it. And there was cocaine in those chocolates. And what did she mean when she said, the other, yes, but not this? It needs explaining, that. And the sleek Monsieur Lazarus, what is he doing in all this? What does she know, Madame Rice? She knows something, but I cannot make her speak. She is not of those you can frighten into speech, but she knows something, Hastings. Is her tale of the telephone true, or did she invent it? If it is true, whose voice was it? I tell you, Hastings, this is all very black, very black. Always darkest before dawn, I said reassuringly. He shook his head. Then the other box that came by post. Can we rule that out? No, we cannot, because Mademoiselle is not sure. It is an annoyance, that. He groaned. I was about to speak when he stopped me. No, not another proverb. I cannot bear it. If you would be the good friend, the good, helpful friend. Yes, I said eagerly. Go out, I beg of you, and buy me some playing cards. I stared. Very well, I said coldly. I could not but suspect that he was making a deliberate excuse to get rid of me. Here, however, I misjudged him. That night, when I came into the sitting-room about 10 o'clock, I found Poirot carefully building card-houses, and I remembered. It was an old trick of his, soothing his nerves. He smiled at me. Yes, You remember, one needs the precision, one card on another. So, in exactly the right place, and that supports the weight of the card on top, and so on, up and up. Go to bed, Hastings. Leave me here, with my house of cards. I clear the mind. It was about 5 in the morning when I was shaken awake. Poirot was standing by my bedside. He looked pleased and happy. "It was very just what you said, mon ami. Oh, it was very just. More, it was spirituel." I blinked at him, being imperfectly awake. "Always darkest before dawn. That is what you said. It has been very dark, and now it is dawn." I looked at the window. He was perfectly right. No, Hastings. In the head, the mind, the little grey cells. He paused, and then said quietly, "You see, Hastings, Mademoiselle is dead." "What?" I cried, suddenly wide awake. "Hush, hush. It is, as I say, not really, bien entendu, but it can be arranged. Yes, for 24 hours it can be arranged. I arrange it with the doctor, with the nurses. You comprehend, Hastings? The murderer has been successful. 4 times he has tried and failed. The 5th time he has succeeded. And now we shall see what happens next. It will be very interesting."